Okay, Rabbi Isai, let's go for it. We're going to learn the halachas of Zecher lechurban, the halachas of leaving an Amah and Amah unfinished in a new house. As we're heading into the 3 weeks, we're going to start thinking about the churban, so I decided to give a shiur Zecher lechurban. Additionally, I actually just signed on a new property apartment in Givat Zev. So, at some point in the future, build a new house, and I'll have the halachas of leaving over an Amah unfinished. So those two ideas got me thinking about giving this shiur. Okay, so let's do it. So there's a Gemara in Baba Basra Daf Samach Amud Beis. The Gemara says that after the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, there were these holy people called the Perushim. And they said, how can we eat meat? Meat's for karbanos. Now that we don't have karbanos, we just can't eat meat anymore. How can we go and drink wine? Wine is for the nesachim, the wine libations. Now that we don't have any more of the nesachim of wine, how are we going to drink wine? That's it. Indefinitely. No more meat, no more wine. We're done with it. We can't beer to eat meat and drink wine anymore. So Yeshua asked him a question. Guys, machmirim, why are you stopping there? You guys ever heard of the lechurban? How are you guys eating bread? And they're like, Taka, you're right. No more bread. We're not having bread either. Okay. Then Rabbi Yeshua said, guys, you realize there's no more bikurim? How are you guys having bikurim? Are you guys having fruit? Okay, no more fruit. I guess you could have apples and oranges, but no more of the shivas minim. There's no bikurim anymore. Okay. Then Rabbi Yeshua said, there's no Nisa Chamayim anymore. You don't sukkahs, we do Nisa Chamayim. There's no more Nisa Chamayim anymore. I guess it's no more water, guys. Now the Perushim said, okay, wait a second. That we can't do. You can't live without water. You'd say maybe, no water, at least we'll drink wine. There's no wine already. You can't have no wine, no water. This is not going to work. There's a problem. So Rabbi Yeshua went and told them, we need to take gezeros that the Roiv HaTzibur Yochel Amid by. We can only do gezeros that the tzibur is able to handle. So I'll tell you what gezeros we're going to do. We're going to do gezeros like this. When a person is sad beisoi besid, he goes and he plasters his house, he should leave over a small amount unplastered. How much is a small amount? Rabbi Yosef says it's an Amah. Okay. Rabbi Chizda says that where is the location of the Amah? It should be Keneged HaPesach. Rabbeinu Gershom explains, why is it that Rabbi Chizda said Keneged HaPesach? It has to be a place that's easily seen, so it should be in clear eyesight. The Gemara continues with some other things that we do Zecher lechurban. When you are preparing tzarchei suda, the needs for a suda, you should leave something out of the suda. And when a woman wears jewelry, she shouldn't wear all her jewelry. She should leave a piece off. Zecher lechurban. And when you have a chasen, you take a little piece of ash, as the pasuk says, al roish simchasi, that you remember what's the al roish simchasi in the end of the pasuk of remembering Yerushalayim. So you should put a piece of ash on the head of the chasen in the place of his hanachas tefillin to remind him of the churban before he goes and walks down to the chuppah. Okay, now the Shulchan Aruch Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim Taf Kuf Samach says, from the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, Chazal or Misakin, that you can't build a house misoyed umechuyur like a binyan melachim. I don't know what exactly that technique is, but you can't build a house in this fancy plastering type materials like a house of kings. Now, rather, what you should do a relatively more simple method, which we would say tach betit v'sad besid. Don't make it the whole thing high quality material. Rather, you should put the base material of a lower quality and just smear on top of that the higher quality sid. And you should leave over from the sid a Amah by Amah, square Amah of unfinished space. What's an Amah by Amah? I guess Chazon Ish is around 60 centimeters by 60 centimeters. Chayin is 48 by 48. I think it translates to around Chayin is like 18 inches by 18 inches roughly. And the Chazon Ish is 24 inches by 24 inches, more or less. So that is how much you should leave unplastered. Now, there's 2 points that are being said. One point that says is, don't build this fancy house like Binyan Melachim. Number 2, and even the regular house that you build, you should leave over Amah Amah undone, unfinished. Don't be sach besid. Now, based on the Shulchan Aruch, can one build a fancy house? So I see there isn't much discussion about this in the poskim, whether one is allowed to build a fancy house. Now, I don't know, based on building materials, if the building materials that we use nowadays fit into the letter of the law of the Gezerah that you cannot build a binyan malachim. Meaning, a 2-part question. Do we actually use these materials in Metzias? I don't know. Second part question is the concept. You cannot build like a binyan malachim. You can't build a fancy mansion, a fancy palace. And it used to be they did it with these materials, and that would apply to whatever materials there are nowadays. So I agree. I don't really see so much about that in the poskim. It seems that if you use other materials, you won't actually be going against that gezerah. Now, what is it considered a beis malachim anyways? So, once again, you're building it for yourself. You're not a king. So what's beis malachim? So it seems to be anything that's, I would say, out of the ordinary, huge and beautiful. Something that's not just a nice house. Something that's a different level of a nice house would probably be considered a beis malachim. Now, by the way, this halacha is specifically to a house. A beis knesses, a beis medrash, a school. Go for it. You could build it as fancy as you want. Whether it's, but that's fine. This gezerah would not apply. Now, I actually know somebody who I heard that he went to ask the Gedolim in Eretz Yisrael. I don't know who exactly is the Gedolim in Eretz Yisrael, who he went to. But apparently he went and asked, could he build, a very wealthy person, could he build this big, huge house? And apparently he was told that if you use this house for lots of community functions, and you use this house for lots and lots of chesed, you could do it. I think the idea probably was that when it's a personal house, it's a problem. But once it's used for the community, then it would be allowed. But once again, we don't take stories, la halacha, ask your own shaylas. Now, the Meister, the Mishnah Berurah quotes the Torah that one can be sad besid and leave over Amah Amah. Meaning, even though the Shulchan Aruch paskins you can't be sach besid, you can't use the fancy materials, even if you leave over Amah. But the Torah paskins that you could use the fancy materials as long as you leave over Amah. And the Mishnah Berurah says that is the minhag. The Shlah was known to scream and go crazy about how could people be building these fancy houses in Chutz La'aretz. I think the Shlah was bothered both halachically and hashkafically. What? You're here to stay? You're building something to last for 100 years? For what? That was the take of the Shlah. Now the second point was when one builds even a normal house, he needs to leave over a 1x1 Amah space unplastered, unfinished. Now, the Mishnah Berurah questions why the minhag has become, apparently, the minhag became that people were not doing this. They were not leaving over 1x1 Amah. This 1x1 Amah by Amah. Why weren't they doing that? What's going on, guys? It's in the Shulchan Aruch. So apparently, Radin, early 1900s, it wasn't happening. People weren't doing it. Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, late 1800s, asked the same question. What's going on? Why aren't people leaving it over? Why are people not keeping this halacha? The Mishnah Berurah suggests maybe people aren't using it because maybe the materials that we use nowadays are different than the materials of the Zman Gezerah, and the Gezerah perhaps doesn't apply. We mix some sand into our plaster and it's kind of different. But however, the Mishnah Berurah is not very happy about it, and the Mishnah Berurah seems to want you to leave over that Amah by Amah. The Aruch HaShulchan asks the same question: why are they doing this? The Aruch HaShulchan, gives more validity and more value to that idea that maybe it's different materials. He gives the same suggestion as the Mishnah Berurah. The Mishnah Berurah doesn't really like it. The Aruch HaShulchan is a little bit more satisfied. Okay, now, but Lamaisa, everybody says you should leave it over. Now, this would explain why I'm sure there's people here that don't really know this halacha. That, they heard something, whatever, but they don't really know this halacha that you have to leave Amah. And it makes sense because their grandfather didn't do it. Because it seems to be 100 years ago, this wasn't done. However, this minhag in recent times has picked up. A lot more people have been doing this than they used to. Now, some say that the minhag does not apply in Yerushalayim. The minhag not to do this. Others qualify that it's only minhag in Yerushalayim not to do this when you are in straight sight of the old city. But if you cannot see the old city, that would apply. I guess, the first and second floor apartments, it won't work. But when you go to the 23rd floor penthouse and you could see Yerushalayim, then you wouldn't need it. I don't know, it sounds a little strange to me, but maybe. L'meisa, tachlis. There's many people in Yerushalayim that leave over the Amah by Amah. I think there's many. I've seen it much more in Yerushalayim leaving over the Amah by Amah than I see it in the Chutz La'aretz. So therefore, I would say you can't say it's not minhag Yerushalayim not to. If anything, it's minhag Yerushalayim nowadays to leave over the Amah by Amah. It's much more common here than I'm familiar with in Chutz La'aretz. Okay, so if one buys a ready-made house from a guy, or he buys a ready-made house from a Jew who bought it from a guy, the guy who built the house does not need to leave a Amah by Amah, and therefore the Jew who buys it now does not need to leave a Amah by Amah. It seems to be it's a halacha on somebody that builds a house, not somebody that owns a house. Okay, is it a nice thing to do anyways? Let's say a Jew buys a house from a guy. Is it a nice thing to scrape off an Amah by Amah that you have an Amah by Amah unfinished? Answer, yeah, it's a nice thing. But it's clear that the takana of Chazal does not require one to do that. If one wants to do that because it's a nice thing and you'll go and you remember the churban Yerushalayim. And as we know, whoever's misavel Yerushalayim will be zecher to see it rebuilt. And whoever is not misavel Yerushalayim won't be zecher to see it being rebuilt. So it's certainly a good thing to be misavel, to mourn the destruction of Yerushalayim. So therefore, is it a good thing to put it there? Definitely is. It sure is. But it's certainly not a chiyuv. Okay. Now, if someone bought a house from a Jew who built it to live in, the Jew built it to live in. Did the Jew leave Amah? No, he didn't. Why not? I don't know. The same reason that all other people didn't. But L'maisa, there's always people that haven't. So this person didn't leave the Amah. You come now and you buy it from him. Do you have to now scrape off Amah by Amah? So the Baz says you don't have to scrape off Amah by Amah. The Magen Avraham says, yeah, you do. It was built by Isser. Now you have to scrape it off. The Ma'aseh Mishnah Berurah and the Poskim seem to go like the Magen Avraham that you do have to scrape it off. So if you buy from a Jew who built it to live in, and now you're moving in, you got to scrape off that Amah by Amah. You bought it from a guy, you don't have to. Ramosha has an interesting chiddush. Ramosha says that if a Jew built it not to live in, but a Jew built it for business, he built it to sell, the Jew built it to rent out, then for those purposes, the Jew does not have to leave over Amah by Amah. And now the renter or the buyer that comes in, he doesn't have to scrape off Amah by Amah. It was built beheter. The guy didn't need to scrape off Amah by Amah. And if the guy didn't need to scrape off by Amah, you, the renter, you, the buyer, you don't have to either. It's all good. Okay, great. Now, the Dvar Yeshua argues on Rav Moshe and that last point, and he says that a renter would have to scrape it off even though it was built beheter. Now, Lamaisa, I think we're going to go with Ramosha over the Dvar Yeshua. Now, if the house was bought by a Jew before the walls were plastered, I mean, it's very common, meaning, let's say you buy something that they're in middle of construction, they're putting up a new project, they're 80% the way done, they have the skeleton of the building up or whatever it is, and now you buy in. Obviously, for sure, that's considered, you have to go and leave over Amah by Amah. If it's not finished yet, you definitely have to leave over that Amah by Amah. Now, as we said, if you buy from a guy, you don't need to leave over and you don't need to scrape off. Now, what if I bought it from a guy and I do a gut job on the apartment? I take down the walls and I put up new walls in different places and I replaster everything. Then I would need to leave over Amah by Amah. What if I just repaint? I mean, I bought it from a guy and now I repaint the place. I don't do any replastering. Maybe I spachte up. I spackle up a little hole there, a hole there in the wall, but I don't go and redo full walls, and I don't put up new walls. I'm just repainting. So, would I need to leave a Amah by Amah? So the Migdal Shein, based on the Pri Megadim, says that a renter, and certainly would apply to a buyer as well, would need to leave over Amah by Amah when he paints. Now, I think that I don't think the place can go with this, because I think if this was the accepted halacha, that when a renter or somebody buys from a guy paints, he needs to leave over Amah by Amah, I would expect this to be all over the poskim. They would all have to talk about this. This is super common. I mean, we know that halacha, it's clear cut. When you buy from a guy, no Amah by Amah. What, you never paint? You bought from a guy 30 years ago. You never painted? Most people paint their house at some point. And if the halacha was that anybody that painted their house needed to leave it Amah by Amah, we would need all the poskim to be very vocal about this, be loud and scream, and tell me it's halacha. From the fact that I don't see anybody talking about it, to me it seems clear that the poskim hold that you don't need to leave over Amah by Amah. I cannot prove this last point that I said, but that is my hargasha. So does a renter require that Amah by Amah? So we just said, we quoted the Migdal Shein who said yes. Ramosha says no. It's the landlord's chiyuv, Dr. Moshe. It's not the renter. However, Rav Yashiv and the Chazon Ish, they seem to say that a renter does have the requirement of leaving over a Amah by Amah. Now, Rav Yashiv and the Chazon Ish agree that you can't scrape off that Amah and Amah without the permission of the Baal HaBayis. Now, I do not know what the Chazon Ish and Rav Yashim say if the landlord built it for the purpose of renting out. I don't know whether they agree or disagree with that Chiddush or Ramosha. I know that the Chazon Ish and Rav Yashim will say that if the landlord built it to live in and then goes and rents it out, then the renter has a chiyuv. But I do not know whether or not Rav Yashiv and the Chazon Ish agree with the Chiddush that when it was built for business, that it does not need to be, you do not need to leave over Amah by Amah. Now, one thing to point out is the proper thing is to never plaster and paint that Amah by Amah. Now, if you did, then you scrape it off. But that's plan B, is scraping it off. Plan A, the Iker way of doing it, is to just leave that Amah by Amah unfinished. And by the way, if you're going to have wallpaper, you're going to leave that Amah by Amah undone. Now, if you have like in America, Eretz Yisrael, they build with a lot of heavy cement and a lot of plaster, and that's all about scraping off and leaving unplastered. What about if you're in America? A lot of places in America, they're going to have, let's say, wood frames and put sheetrock on top, geves, and as they would call it in Israel, sheetrock on top of those wood frames. What would you do then? So you don't have to cut off a piece of the sheetrock and leave a hole in your room. You could have that sheetrock, have it attached to the wood frame, and just don't paint or plaster on that sheetrock Amah by Amah. Now, it seems that one fulfills the requirement, and back to Eretz Yisrael style construction, it seems to be that one fulfills the requirement by just leaving the last layer undone. However, I think the lechatchila way, and I think it's the minhag already to do it, is to scrape all the way down to the cement, or leave it undone all the way from the cement. The Chasam Sofer says that you have to leave an Amah by Amah in every room. That is not the minhag. I don't know anybody that does that. Okay. As we said, a shul or yeshiva doesn't require Amah by Amah. What about a dormitory? Does a dormitory require Amah? So lechurban, yes. Maybe, if you're going to tell me this dormitory is just a place, the Bacham just go in there, chop a little sleep, and back to the base medrash. And it's just serving the base medrash, and it's come out of chilek of the base medrash. Maybe you could say it doesn't need Amah by Amah. But let's face it, what's probably going on in most dormitories, I think Amah by Amah would be fitting. What about a dira for Bachram that for sure requires Amah by Amah? That's a house. What about a seminary? So Rav Yasha says a seminary requires Amah by Amah. What about a office or a store? So the Netik Avril says an office or store requires Amah by Amah. Amah. Rav Kalas asked the Sheila and the Netik Avril, and I think he has a good argument that he says, wait a second, it keeps on using the lashon of bias. You know, the Paiskim knew how to say store, and they didn't. So it's a little bit funny to say that the store would require. Okay. It seems to be at a point there was a minhag of leaving an Amah by Amah painted black. The Paiskim have issues with that. I would say nowadays for sure don't do that because nobody's going to even know what that means. This black square of Amah by Amah on your wall. They'll just think you're some weird Gothic fellow and don't do it. What about apparently there was a minhag of leaving a black square and writing on it Zecher lechurban. So this is much better because people will actually get what you're doing. However, the Paiskim do frown upon it and do say it shouldn't be done. L'maisa, the Paiskim conclude in limchos. We don't make a macha against somebody who did it, but it's better to just leave it unplastered and unpainted than to paint it black and write Zecher lechurban. Can one cover the Amah by Amah? I don't know, put a bookshelf in front of it or a picture or something. So the Vush says no. The Orchos Rabbeinu says that the Chazon Ish allowed it. Now, tzarchim, why? It sounds very strange. Remember we quoted the Rabbeinu Gershon in the Gemara. It says it's supposed to be an open eyesight. Tzarchim, why the Chazon Ish would allow it. But I don't know. Apparently he did. Okay. Can the Amah by Amah look artistic? Can it look nice? Does it have to look bad? Or let's say you find a way to make it look nice. Would that be allowed? So, l'chayra, presumably it would be fine to leave, as long as when you see it, you get it. And it's a Zecher lechurban, l'chayra, it would be fine. Now, my old apartment had a very artistic thing. It had Amah by Amah left completely undone. And then it was covered by glass. The glass protruded like 2 inches or so off the wall. So you could actually peek from the side and see the unfinished without looking through the glass. Or you could look through the glass and see the unfinished stone, cement, and it had in the glass engraved like a little like Yerushalayim type picture, and Imish Yerushalayim it said, and it was a very nice piece of art. Is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? So, on the one hand, it's supposed to look unfinished and not nice, and this looked really nice. So maybe it's not so good. On the other hand, this actually brought attention to the Amah. When people walked in, they looked at it, they stared at it, they noticed it, and l'maisa, since it brought positive attention to it, l'chayra, it's a good thing. I can understand why somebody might have a taina against it, but l'chayra, it's a fine thing. Now, what about can somebody leave a full wall of, let's say they leave a full wall of Jerusalem stone, or they leave a full wall of stone that resembles the kosel, and maybe even put on an Imish Yerushalayim. And they don't plaster it at all. In the entire wall, they don't plaster anything. They just leave it fully tiled like the kosel. with no plaster on top. Would that be allowed? So it's a good question. I would say it depends. If when one looks at it, one gets it right away that this is the Zecher, the churban wall. This reminds me of Yerushalayim. This reminds me of the churban. Beautiful. I think it's perfectly fine. If though one looks at it and says, "Whoa, what a beautiful artistic wall. This looks very nice," as I shane, without striking you as Zecher Yerushalayim lechurban, then lechayra it would be a problem. The Munkacher Rebbe said that don't think that a picture of the Kaisel is good enough. It's not good enough. Now, where exactly should this Amah by Amah go? So the Shulchan Aruch, well, it's really the Gemara, says it should be Keneged HaPesach, across from the wall. Presumably the idea is every time you walk into your house, you should see it. You should see the Amah. You should always go and remember Yerushalayim, l'chayra, that is the idea. Now, what if that place is impractical? I don't know, there's a coat closet there, or something of the sort. It doesn't always work out that that's a place where you have a wall to put something. So what if you don't? What's the next best option? So the place can seem to say, somewhere where, in the Baal Bus sits at his dining room table, somewhere where you could see it. So it should be somewhere where it could be seen. The Divrei Chaim, not everybody agrees to that, by the way. There might be an idea, the Gemara said it should be a davar mu'at. Maybe it's not supposed to be, you don't need to give it prime real estate. There's an argument to say it doesn't require prime real estate, but the Ma'aser Rova, the person seem to like this idea of giving it some prominence somewhere where the Baal Bayis will see it. The Divrei Chaim put it on top of the door. I don't know exactly why. We see this brought down already. The Mishnah Berurah alludes to it. So I don't know what, but it seems like the Mishnah Berurah was talking about a small house where on top of the door was also a place where the Baal Bayis saw it from his dining room. I think people nowadays, a lot of people have houses bigger than the houses of Rodin. Now, something that Reb Chaim Kanievsky points out: the room that you put it in needs to be dalet al dalet. So it needs to be have a din bias, just like by mezuzah. Some people, by the way, put their mezuzah in the front door when it leads to a room which isn't 4x4. You should put mezuzah in the front door, but you don't make a bracha on that mezuzah. You make a bracha on the mezuzah that's by a room that is 4x4 amas. So if sometimes a lot of people's entrance isn't 4x4 amas, that's Reb Chaim Kanievsky, that would not be the right place to put the imesh kochech. The Amah by Amah, Now the Pri Megadim says that it should be a square. You shouldn't have a rectangle, even if it has the square footage of an Amah by Amah. It should be a rectangle. Presumably, the reason for the Pri Megadim is that if it's a random rectangle, you won't chop what it is. Only when it's a perfect square will you chop what it is. So we could, if that's true, if you would have a rectangle, but it would be obvious for whatever reason that it is clear to everybody that it is because you were leaving over the Amah by Amah, then l'chayra it would be God's fine. Okay, now it seems the reason for it's fine. The Abir Yaakov, I just want to talk a little bit about the schools of leaving over Amah by Amah for a second. The Abir Yaakov, I think that was the father or the grandfather of Baba Sali. He says, I think it's the father of the Baba Sali. He says that leaving over the Amah by Amah is a school for atzlacha in your life. The Yavitz says a house having the Amah by Amah left over, it's a school for shalom bayis. So there's definitely a big mailus in leaving over this Amah by Amah. Now, let's go back and discuss for a minute some of the other gezeras and takanas of the Gemara. So we also discussed putting ashes on the head of the chassan before he walks down to the chuppah. L'maisa, I think the Olam does this. I think this is universally accepted as a minhag. Now, a woman should leave off a piece of jewelry. So this is really not much of an issue nowadays because most women have much more jewelry. They can't wear all their jewelry at one time anyways. So therefore, they anyways leave something off. So it's pretty simple to do that. I don't know how many points you gain for doing it because it doesn't take any effort. But l'maisa, that's what happens nowadays. Another one of the points was that you should leave something out from the Suda. So this is from a practical standpoint, it's very difficult to implement. Because usually if you don't serve something, so you just didn't serve it that meal. What does it mean to leave something out from the Suda? I don't think you have to make a food and not serve it. That sounds a little baltashkasi. So what does it mean you leave something out from the Suda? So some say to set an extra setting, and nobody will be for that setting. That would be a setting for Zecher lechurban. Now, this isn't generally done. People don't do this in every meal to leave a setting undone. Maybe there are people that do. I never saw it. One thing that is nice, if somebody makes a simcha, and to leave one setting open, Zecher lechurban. I don't think most people do this. I don't think a lot of people do this. But I would say that there's definitely something to that in doing that. That sounds like a good thing to do. Now, the plate, there's by the Tanoim, the mechatenisters, there's no English word for that, right? The mothers and mother-in-laws and whatever, the mechatenisters, the mother of the chassan and the mother of the kala, they go and they break a plate. That is Zecher lechurban, they're going to break that plate. You know, it used to be when people cared more about a plate, when they had less material things, when a posik would paskin in, that a plate was treif, a cheres plate, which can't be koshered, got treifed up. They always used to say to the lady that was bringing it, here, you use this plate for your children's wedding. That was just always a nice thing that the poskim used to always implement so people wouldn't feel bad when they lost their plate. Nowadays, I think people don't care so much about a plate, so I don't think it's so necessary. Okay, another thing that we do Zecher lechurban is that after we see by the chasana in America, it's always at the end. In Yerushalayim, it depends how you do it. Some people do it earlier on in the chuppah. Some people do it by the end of the chuppah. But let's focus on America over here, that we do at the end of the chuppah, that we sing Imesh Shechech Yerushalayim. It used to be that some places, some people did sing Imesh Shechech, and some people don't sing Imesh Shechech. I think already it's become the thing that almost everybody sings Imesh Shechech. And then after that, the chassan smashes a glass, and then everybody says Mazel Tov, and they start singing and dancing. Why is the chassan smashing the glass? Zecher lechurban. This is the time of the epitome of his simcha, his chasana, and he breaks the glass to remember Yerushalayim. Now, many question the practice of saying Mazel Tov and starting to sing and dancing right away after breaking the glass. The truth is, I don't think it's a problem. Maybe if you didn't sing Imesh Shechech, you could say maybe there's not enough focus on it. But since the guy sing Imesh Shechech for 3 minutes, for 4 minutes before you break the glass, that's plenty of time for the chassan to contemplate Zecher lechurban, and he gets the smack, the last thought of that Zecher lechurban, and then we're done with that. Guys, we're at a wedding. We're not at a Beis Avil. It's a wedding. It's a time for simcha. So this is the end of his Zecher lechurban, and now all of a sudden we're back to our simcha. Let's sing and dance and Mazel Tov. We should all be able to be mis'avel Yerushalayim, and therefore we should be zeicha to see it rebuilt b'kar b'yameinu. Amen.